Okay, today we're going to be looking at different types of solids. More specifically, we're going to be coming up with the names that go along with the different types of solids. I think most of these terms are terms that you have heard before, probably already familiar with them as well. The only thing that may be slightly different is some of the specific names that we might come up with, but you'll see what I'm talking about that here in just a second. This won't take long, so let's get to it. Okay, last time we said there are many properties that go with solids, and it was those properties that are going to help us name these solids. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit of vocabulary, as I said, most of which I think you'll probably already be familiar with. Okay, recall last time we spent some time talking about the bases of the figure. Okay, we hinted that identification of the bases, how many bases there are, where they are, what shapes they are, that's going to be kind of critical to the way that we treat the shape. Okay, so that's gonna start kind of being in effect today. The number of the bases and their shapes will give us much of the information we need to know how to name a solid. And of course, remember, especially if you looked at your assignment last night, it should have kind of dawned on you that yeah, it's true. You can only have two bases in a shape, or I'm sorry, two bases in a solid, or one base, or no base at all. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these different shapes and these different names. Okay, first term that we have is one that you should be familiar with, and that is prism. Okay. Prisms are solids that have two parallel congruent sides that we can call bases. Start the recording again. Here are some examples of some shapes that we can call prisms, and jot them down if you want to. If not, you probably have enough information just by the definition. Okay, but the thing that these shapes all have in common is no matter what the shape, okay, you can look at it and somewhere in the solid you can identify two locations that are across from each other, and those locations are not just across from each other, but it's also the same shape, and they are also parallel to each other. Okay, when that happens, when you get that two location where they're across from each other, they're congruent, they're parallel, then those are bases, and there will be two. Okay, now that is just the general word. Okay, so when they throw the word prism out there, all they have said is that the solid will have two bases. Now, one of the things that you may have already noticed, okay, or will notice, is that when it comes down to prisms, okay, once you decide you have a prism, that means you've got those two bases. But when you look at all of the remaining lateral faces, the thing that you'll notice is that all of the lateral faces tend to be rectangles. Okay, so that's something else you can look for if you're trying to decide that a figure is a prism or not. If you look at the figure and you see a whole bunch of rectangles running around in there, it's a pretty good chance you might be looking at a prism. Okay, so they usually have rectangles as their lateral faces. And the extra piece of information that you might need to get adjusted to today is that our prisms are not going to be just called prisms. They're also going to be identified by what shape their bases are. Okay, so we already said to be a prism, they will have two bases. Okay, but we will call it according to what shape the base is. Okay, so in the figure on the left, okay, can you find a spot in there where you think you got two opposite parallel congruent sides? We actually have several options on this one on the left, don't we? We could do top and bottom. Those are opposite, parallel, and congruent. We could do left and right. We could do front and back. Okay, but in any of those cases, what type of shapes are they? They're rectangles. Okay, so the shape on the left, we wouldn't just call it a prism. We would call it a rectangular prism. The shape in the middle. Okay, can you find locations in there where you got two parallel congruent sides across from each other? Yeah, triangles. So the one in the middle would be called a triangular prism. And the one over on the right, okay, pretty clear to see you've got pentagons on its bases. And the pronunciation of that one, people get a little hung up on. It's called pentagonal. It's a pentagonal prism. Okay, and this is going to be true for just about all the prisms that we have. You identify what shape the bases are, you name that shape, as well as the word prism. Okay, now we said that for most prisms, that is the way we would name them. We would name the shape of their base, and then we would call them a prism. But there are some specialized types of prisms that don't actually get called prism. Okay, one of them fits this description. If a prism were to have circular bases to it, what would that be called? That's a cylinder, yes. Okay. Whatever genius decided that this did not need to be called a prism, I don't know. Okay, but you will never find this shape referred to as a prism. Okay, you'll hear the word cylinder. It'll be up to you to understand that anytime you hear the word cylinder, it is referring to a type of prism, just happens to have circular bases. That way you can be sure to use the correct formulas, because the formulas on your charts are not going to call things cylinders. They will simply call them prisms. You'll have to connect the dots there. Okay, there is another type of prism that does not get called a prism. Anybody have any idea what it is? Pyramid's a different kind of shape altogether. We'll get to it here in a second. Cone? Actually, cone goes with the pyramid, so we'll get to it there as well. Yeah. Okay. What happens if you have a prism that has squares for all of its sides? Cube. There you go. Okay. Now this is a little bit of an unfortunate naming situation. I mean, I think we all know what a cube is, and if you don't know, well, now you do. Okay. But a cube is a particular prism. Now you have to understand that there is a possibility, okay, that this may happen. A lot of times when it comes down to prisms, they don't typically refer to anything as square. Sometimes they do, but not very often. Typically anything that is square, they call it rectangular. Okay, fine. I don't know why they do that, but that's what they do. Okay, so it is possible that you will run into a shape that is termed a rectangular prism. Okay, if it's a rectangular prism, that is different from a cube. Okay, a rectangular prism may actually have squares as its bases, just like the cube does. But if instead of calling it a cube, if they call it a rectangular prism, then what it may mean is instead of being all squares, it may have squares on the bases, but then it may be stretched out, maybe tall, like a cube but taller, or like a cube but shorter. Okay, so watch out for the possibility that they might call something a rectangular prism, and don't automatically assume that they're talking about a cube when they do that. Okay, we've had several people asking about the pyramids or referring to the pyramids. Well, here they are. Okay, the prisms is the subcategory of shapes that have two bases. If a solid only has one base, then this is what we call a pyramid. Okay, now obviously everybody knows what pyramids are, what they look like. As Andrew mentioned earlier, pyramids, these are the shapes that are going to have the vertex in them. And the reason they have the vertex in them is because they only have one base. Now earlier when we were talking about the prisms, okay, we said one of the little properties of prisms, or something that you could watch for, is on prisms you will have your two bases, and then all of your lateral faces will tend to be rectangles. When it comes down to pyramids, you will have your base, and your base may be whatever kind of a shape it happens to be. But with pyramids, your lateral faces is not a tendency, it's a fact. They will be triangles. Okay, so if you are curious, if you're looking at a prism or a pyramid, if you look at the figure and it's almost all rectangles, that's probably a prism. If you look at your figure and it's almost all triangles, that's probably a pyramid. Now, the same idea for the naming of our pyramids is going to be in effect here. We won't just call a shape a pyramid. It will also be identified by the shape of its base. Okay, so what would we call this shape on the left? There's only one left. Okay. It's a pentagon. Remember that word? It's called pentagonal. There you go. Pentagonal pyramid. Okay. What about the shape in the center? What would we call it? Triangular pyramid. And this guy over here, rectangular pyramid. And again, you'll hear it called both, Okay, especially when it comes down to pyramids, they do tend to use the word square a little bit more often than they do with prisms. Okay, so it is possible that they may call a pyramid a square pyramid, okay, but it is slightly more better chance that you'll hear it called a rectangular pyramid, but we need to know both just in case. Okay. Okay. Now, one more specific type of pyramid, okay, and it also deals just like with the cylinder. What happens if our pyramid happens to have a circular base? What's our term for that guy? That's a cone. Okay. So once again, you won't ever hear the term circular pyramid or anything like that. It'll be up to us to understand that a cone is a pyramid that just happens to have a circular base. Okay, and there is only one other specific kind of shape that we want to discuss, and it of course is the situation where we don't have any bases, and I think everybody's well aware that that official term is sphere. And spheres are not the only geometric shape that don't have any bases, but they are the only ones that we are going to look at in a class like this one. Okay, so that's basically it. Okay, the only thing you have for an assignment is to make sure you've got your vocabulary memorized, and if you have paid any attention at all, that typically means you've got a quiz coming the next class period, so I'd be prepared for that.